We'll do Hadith first. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Al-Fasl al-Thalithu. An Mu'adhin qala أوصاني رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بعشر كلمات. Mu'adh radiallahu anh mentions the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam advised me of 10 things. قال لا تشرك بالله شيئا وإن قتلت أو حرقت. Do not associate anyone with Allah as a partner, as an equal, even if you are killed or you are burnt. This refers to associating partners with Allah, batinan, inside your heart and in your mind. It does not include when you are forced to say something that is an act of kufr at the threat of your life. You are, as the Quran tells us, allowed to say acts of kufr to save your life or the life of your loved ones. Openly, however, in your heart and in your mind, you must always have firm faith. وَقَلْبُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ, that the heart is content with faith. However, even if you are forced in the heart, you should never accept in the mind, because you have no excuse of accepting kufr or made to worship Allah, made to worship other than Allah, or as a partner with Allah in the heart and in the mind. وَلَا تَعُقَّنَّ وَالِدَيْكَ وَإِنْ أَمَرَاكَ أَن تَخْرُجْ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ وَمَالِكَ. And do not disobey your parents, even if they command you to leave your family and leave your wealth. The commentators of Hadith mention, i.e., do not disobey your parents if they command you to leave your family or your wife by divorce, or your wealth, in the sense that they tell you to do something with your wealth that you do not want, or they want part of your wealth. You should not disobey them. Now, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentions, it does not mean that you are obliged to listen to your parents if they tell you to divorce your wife, or they tell you to do something with your wealth you're not pleased with at all. Rather, what it's saying is, if what they tell you has a basis and is reasonable, then it's better to follow them. Not that you're obliged to follow them and listen to their commands. But if they have no basis at all for why they're telling you that, to leave your wife, or for example, to leave your part of your wealth or give it up, without any logical reasons behind it, and the way you would know there's logical or sensible reasons behind it is you consult the people of knowledge and intellect to see if they agree with your parents or not, or they can rationalize the reason behind it. If it cannot be done so, then you are not obliged to listen to them, because the whole reason why you're commanded to listen to them, one of the reasons, is because they would always have your interest in the heart. But when it becomes clear they don't have your interest in the heart, then you're not obliged to listen to that. I will explain this in a bit more detail at the end of the hadith. Next part. وَلَا تَتْرُكَنَّ صَلَاةً مَكْتُوبَةً مُتَعَمِّدًا. And do not leave an obligatory prayer on purpose. فَإِنَّ مَنْ تَرَكَ صَلَاةً مَكْتُوبَةً مُتَعَمِّدًا فَقَدْ بَرِيَتْ مِنْهُ ذِمَّةُ اللَّهِ. For indeed, whoever leaves an obligatory prayer on purpose, then he is free from the responsibility of Allah or the protection of Allah. Zimmatullah refers to, as the commentators of Hadith mentioned, i.e., now he is not safe from being punished by Allah in this dunya or in the hereafter. And Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentions, i.e., this sentence is basically like a parable or example, simply saying that he has no ihtiram, no honor, or no value in the eyes of Allah anymore. He's free from being respected by Allah, and hence being safe from his punishment. وَلَا تَشْرَبَنَّ خَمْرًا, and do not drink khamr, wine, فَإِنَّهُ رَأْسُ كُلِّ فَاحِشَةٍ, because it is the head of every inappropriate sin. I.e., because the thing that stops us from doing sins as well as indecent actions are, number one, our intellect, and number two, our iman. But when you become drunk, you lack both. You do not have control of your intellect, and nor is your mind conscious enough to judge based upon your iman, because your brain is not fully there. Hence, the barrier that would stop you from doing sin, both of them have been removed, and that's why the becoming drunk is the root of many sins. We will speak about that in more detail when we cover this in tafsir, because underlining figures, when they are revealed, how much harm drinking wine causes to the society as well as to the individual, to the family, to the economy, you will be shocked. وَإِيَّاكَ وَالْمَعْصِيَةَ فَإِنَّ بِالْمَعْصِيَةِ حَلَّ سَخَطُ اللَّهِ, and be away and keep away from sins, because indeed the sin is what leads the anger of Allah descending upon you and coming upon you. Because when one becomes accustomed to sin, then one becomes accustomed to rebellion to God, and one becomes accustomed to that which God dislikes. And when God dislikes you, He sends His sakhat and His anger upon you. وَإِيَّاكَ وَالْفِرَارُ مِنَ الزَّحْمِ وَإِنْ حَلَكَ النَّاسِ, and be aware of running away from the battlefield, even if the people perish. وَإِذَا أَصَابَ النَّاسِ مَوْتٌ وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ فَاثْبُتْ, and if the people are facing death and you're amongst them, then stay steadfast. I.e., if the people are in an extreme pandemic and you see the people passing away, stay firm. Don't leave your town to go elsewhere, because you will spread the disease. So if you are firm for the sake of Allah, Allah will reward you abundantly. وَأَنْفِقْ عَلَى عِيَالِكَ مِنْ طَوْلِكَ, and spend on your family from your ability. I.e., do not be like those individuals that, are happy to spend upon themselves and even on their friends, but when their wife or the kids ask them of something, they become so strict. And even if they can find something 50p cheaper elsewhere, they'll say, we won't buy here, we'll go to the other shop. But themselves, they're ordering things worth hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So don't be like those people that are so strict and with the conditions they put on their loved ones in spending their wealth, yet spend so much themselves. This is a form of injustice. And sadly, you'll be surprised how many men can do this. I've had men boast to me that they only allow £20 allowance to their wives a week. And if she wants to save for something, she has to keep that together, not spend any of it until a couple of weeks pass or a month pass, and then she can buy something she wants. Sadly, that marriage did not last, which isn't surprising for you to hear. But as the Hadith says, وَأَنْفِقْ عَلَى إِيَالِكَ مِنْ طَوْلِكَ, spend upon your family from your ability. وَلَا تَرْفَعْ عَنْهُمْ عَصَاكَ أَدَبًا, and do not lift your stick from them to teach them etiquettes. Meaning that do not remove from the household the ability to discipline, to keep them in check, because children, as well as anyone else who's immature, if they do not have checks and balances, they will rebel or cause harm to themselves and others, or develop characteristics that will cause them short-term as well as long-term harm later in any relationship they have now, as well as relationships they will develop later. So do not lift from them your stick out as a means of keeping them in check. وَأَخِفْهُمْ فِي اللَّهِ, and scare them in regards to Allah. I.e., let them know how severe it is to go against the commands of Allah, and the punishment one may receive, and beyond that, the might of Allah, that how dare they disobey Him. Okay, now the first thing is, you will notice that this hadith contains some exaggerations that are not found in other hadith. And this hadith is weak. Its chain is not complete. Abdurrahman bin Jubair bin Nufair did not meet Mu'adh radiallahu anhu. So the hadith is weak. And this is the one of the ways through which you can identify a weak hadith. The often weak hadiths tend to contain exaggerations which are not found in the authentic hadith. And the authentic hadiths are a lot more balanced. So if you see in this weak hadith, it says that do not even disobey your parents, even if they tell you to leave your family, your wife and your kids. So your wife and your wealth. It's an exaggeration you don't find in authentic hadith. Likewise, that do stay steadfast even if the people have fled is a bit of an exaggeration, because we learn from the Quran you are allowed to, in certain circumstances, make a strategic retreat. So overall, the hadith is not authentic. Most of the content of the hadith is reliable, but in a less exaggerated form. Overall, the meaning of the hadith, most of it is authentic and reliable. However, there is exaggerations, slightly more compared to authentic hadith, and the chain is not accepted. Okay, next hadith. وَأَنْ حُذَيْفَةَ قَالَ إنما النفاق كان على عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فأما اليوم فإنما هو الكفر أو الإيمان. Imam al-Bukhari reports from Hudayfa radiallahu anh, the hypocrisy was at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As for today, it's either kufr or iman. What does this hadith mean? Allah knows best, but I believe amongst the strongest explanation of this hadith is that to pinpoint someone as a major hypocrite was something that was done at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Prophet received wahy and revelation that pinpointed and named the hypocrites, the major hypocrites, the nifaqul akbar, the major hypocrisy when someone has no faith in the heart and is the equivalent of a spy and pretending to be Muslim. This was something at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's either kufr or iman. We judge people upon their apparent. Either if they're Muslim, we treat them like Muslims. If they're non-Muslims, they say openly, we treat them like that. We can't pinpoint who's Muslim and who's a munafiq clear cut in our times. This is what the hadith means. Some people have interpreted it as saying that Hudayfa radiallahu anh meant that hypocrisy, kufr and iman existed at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now it's only kufr and iman. There can't be hypocrisy anymore. However, the problem with this interpretation, interpreting the hadith of the words of Hudayfa according to this interpretation, is as Ibn Taymiyyah mentions in his al-Masabih, that Hudayfa radiallahu anh also said that there are more hypocrites after the Prophet ﷺ than there were during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So if he said such a statement that there's more hypocrites now, then obviously he did not mean hypocrisy itself has come to an end. Rather, the first explanation we gave, which makes more sense, that the fixing of hypocrites, which was done through revelation, pinpointing by name, was done at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but we can no longer do that. Babun fil waswasa. Any questions before we go further? People say Zuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha together. Is it okay to read all four together? Okay. Is it okay? No, that's obviously haram. One's not allowed to pray all 4 prayers at the same time. There's no jump bainal salawat kulliha. You can't combine the prayers together. Um, that's if you think of talking about combining Dhuhr and Asr and then Maghrib and Isha, that is for another time. It does not relate to this hadith and it's not relevant. And we will talk about it when we cover that in the chapter of Salah in Mishkat-ul-Masabih. Let's continue. Babun fil waswasa. The chapter regarding waswasa, whispers from the shaitan. That's important, and pay attention that we separate between what's waswasa and what are auditory hallucinations, as people can get the two confused. Waswasa is a whisper from the shaitan, and it is something, a voice that's in your head, but it does not speak. It doesn't have a noise to it. And it's a waswasa from the shaitan, often installing fear, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, يُخَوِّفُ أَوْلِيَاءَ ذَلِكُمُ الشَّيْطَانِ. Shaitan aims to scare, to fright, to put anxiety and fear, doubts, disturbing thoughts, often questioning matters of your religion. And it is separate from auditory hallucinations, which are actual sounds and voices you hear. And these tend to be sarcastic in nature, often illogical, and they are constantly persistent, always there normally. Whereas the waswas of the shaitan comes and disappears. Khannas, he withdraws. He plants his little grenade of doubts and he withdraws and he keeps coming back here and there. Both of these things have, and with every illness, they have a pattern linked to them. And it's through the pattern that and symptoms by which you can separate between them. For example, waswasa, that's from the shaitan, indicates if it's regular, if it's accompanied, for example, by a jinn issue, someone who has been attacked by the jinn, it will have certain symptoms. For indeed, jinns are firing beings, so often people that have this tend to get their body hotter more than normal. And when the shaitans leave, they just feel super cold out of nowhere. Often these people are much more prone to anger and quicker. Often these people get nightmares a lot more. Often these people see shadowy figures or black dogs or snakes in dreams, or feel touched by creatures or monsters, or whispers calling their name. Auditory hallucinations, especially ones that are common with psychosis, often are linked with not just seeing or hearing voices. You also have strange shapes that you see, strange colors that you see, strange taste you have in the mouth. And likewise, you get this behaviors that are common with both. For example, if someone has been possessed by a jinn, often they'll eat a lot and still lose weight. Often they'll feel tired much quicker. Often they'll get pins and needles. Often they get pain in the head, neck, and shoulders. But again, to diagnose each one of them, you need a qualified expert. Because, for example, pins and needles has 35 other medical causes. So it's where a qualified raqi needs to do a correct diagnosis to separate between the two, separate mental health from supernatural illnesses such as jinn, magic, and evil eye, as well as excessive waswasa from the shaitan. Because even if you're not affected by jinn, everyone has waswasa of the shaitan. But that's gives you a clue, an idea of some differences between them. The list of symptoms as well as patterns is much longer, but that's not what we are here to talk about today. Let's continue. The first hadith. عن أبي هريرة قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله تجاوز عن أمتي ما وسوست به صدورها ما لم تعمل به أو تتكلم. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu reports the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, indeed Allah has forgiven for my ummah that which their selves whispers to them, as long as they do not speak it, they do not utter it, they do not act upon it. What their inner self whispers to them, the thoughts that comes to them in their minds, is forgiven as long as they do not utter them out. I do not bring them and make them into words, and do not act upon them. I do not make them into actions. So, for example, if a person was to think about divorcing his wife, but he hasn't said it and acted upon it, it does not occur. As a simple example, i.e., one is not held accountable and liable for those thoughts. Imam an-Nawawi, commenting on this hadith, says this is as long as the thought doesn't become firm in your mind, and you don't accept it, and you don't make an intention to act upon it. When all these three are met, then you may be held accountable. To explain this further, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani in Fath al-Bari breaks it down into the following categories. He says, as for the thoughts which a person gets, first type is a thought which occurs to him and disappears. It just occurs and disappears. This is known as waswasa, and this is forgiven. The second type is when the thought comes and then you maybe dislike it, and it goes, then it comes again and you dislike it, and for example, and it goes. This is taraddud. This is the second type, second level. The third is where a person gets the thought and he does not even dislike the thought. It's in his mind and it just stays there. But he doesn't fully accept it and he doesn't intend to act upon it clearly. It's just in his mind, it's there. And that's known as al-ham, the third level. The fourth level is where it comes to him, it stays there, he doesn't like it, he accepts it, and he wishes to act upon it. And this is known as al-azm. That's the fourth level. Now, the first three are not what you're held accountable for. Where the thought comes and it goes, and the third comes and you go back and forth, and you end up dismissing it. The third, the thought comes and you haven't settled upon it. It's there. You haven't rejected it, but you haven't settled upon it also. And you haven't made an intention to do it. The fourth is where it's come, you've let it stay, you've accepted it, you liked it, and you intend to do it, but you haven't carried it out. This is the fourth level. And this is of two types. This idea in your head, this fourth level idea, is either something that requires an action, such as zina, for example, or swearing, because you need to utter it out, or a thing that settles in the heart and it doesn't even require an action, such as pride, such as jealousy, such as hatred, such as like for this which Allah disliked, such as even kufr, nifaq. You've accepted in your heart, you haven't actually acted upon it. The ruling of this fourth one is that you're held accountable, whichever type it is. All three categories. What I mean by all three is this fourth level. It requires an action like zina. You haven't acted upon it, but you intend to do it firmly. You've got the intention, you've accepted it. Now, something else stops you from doing it, you still held accountable. The reason being is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَكِنْ يُؤَاخِذُكُمْ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ قُلُوبُكُمْ. Allah will hold you accountable for your hearts have earned. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that a person who does not have wealth and no knowledge, and if he had wealth, and he says, if I had this wealth, I would do this haram and that haram with it, even though he hasn't done it because he has the intention of doing it, he's equal to the one who has that wealth and has no knowledge and does haram. They both have an equal amount of sin. That shows if it settles into your heart and you accept it and you tend to do it, something else stops you, you're still held accountable. The second level of second category of this fourth type is where it's words of kufr and shirk. Like in your heart, you've accepted kufr, rejection of God, or you've accepted another God. You're held accountable. Or it's not kufr and shirk, it's something less than like kibr, pride. You've accepted it, or jealousy, you're still held accountable. This is how the scholars explain it, and Allah knows best. Let's continue. قال جاء ناس من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى النبي فسألوا. A group of companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to the Prophet of Allah and they questioned him. إنا نجد في أنفسنا ما يتعاظم أحدنا أن يتكلم به. We find in ourselves such things that we consider them too great to even speak. I.e., we in our minds such disgusting and bad things come to us, like who created Allah, or what's the purpose of life, or God does not care for us. Like strange thoughts that come to us, we find them so grave that we can't even utter them to you and tell you what these are. We don't want to speak them. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, أَوَقَدْ وَجَدْتُمُ. Do you really find that? قَالُوا نَعَمْ. They said yes. قَالَ ذَلِكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ. Then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, that is clear faith, clear iman. That is clear iman. Imam an-Nawawi mentions the fact that you find them, which you have no control over, but you dislike them so much that you don't even want to utter them. That's clear faith. The fact that you hate them is affirming you have faith in them. And so the fact that you reject them is affirming that you have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So getting the thought is a sarih iman, isn't clear faith. The fact that you dislike the thoughts, you actively choose to dislike them whilst you have no control over the thoughts coming, that itself is sarih iman, clear faith. Because the thoughts come from the shaitan, that's not in your mind, but you choose to dislike them is from you, and hence that has proven you have faith. As the scholars say, the lis la yankhul al-bayt al-khali. The thief doesn't enter into an empty house. What's the point? Why is he going to steal? Shaitan's not going to go to an evil man and bother him with these petty things. There's nothing to rob. He doesn't have any iman to take from that shaitan can take of him. These type of crazy thoughts come to the hearts of the believers because your mind is filled with treasures that he wants to steal from you. Treasures of faith, treasures which are the keys to the eternal heaven and Allah's happiness. Now, Imam Shah Waliullah Dahlawi in his book Hujjatullah al-Baligha mentions the effects and the way shaitan, and even beyond this, if you read Ibn Jawzi's book upon how the shaitan talbis, how shaitan confuses the people, and he misguides the people. Ibn Qayyim mentions it, Jawziyah mentions it much more detail. But here, in summary, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi mentions that the shaitan will come to you based upon your situation. For some, he'll talk about kufr, he'll make them question the iman, he'll make them question clear actions of Islam. For others, he knows that will not work. He'll come to you and he knows he'll go on a different level. He'll make you think about acts of jealousy or how things are in the household or with your brothers or sisters or wife or children, and he'll make you cause corruption in the household, stir tension between you. Others, it will be different. It could be financial. He'll come to you and so on. Now, if you have faith, then you will, inshallah, use your faith to get rid of it. That's the whole test. Now, one important thing to understand in this hadith is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam quite amazingly has hinted to us to a simple trick we use in therapy, in counseling. That is, when you have something negative that's worrying you, you need to learn to focus on something positive to equal it out. If you're constantly thinking about negativity, you will always be on edge and you just need something small to break you. But if you manage to focus on positives instead of the bad what shaitan gives you, you balance it out, and as a result, you keep the effects of shaitan upon you in check. For example, and this is something I've done many times in counseling myself, some people are constantly worried. Oh, shaitan's around me. Oh, there's a shaitan that's spying on me. I feel there's a jinn in the room. Instead of them getting them to focus on that, you change the perspective. Say, well, read a simple dua. Now you've got angels with you. The angels are closer than the shaitan. You've got nothing to worry about. Doesn't Allah say, "Nahnu aqrabu ilaykum min hablil warid"? Allah is closer to you than your jugular vein. I.e., the power and Allah's ability and Allah's sight of you is far closer to you than the shaitan is or the jinn is. You read your dua, you've got Allah's angels right next to you, you got the protection of Allah right with you. So why are you worried? Focus on that. Allah's looking at you right now. Your protection is there. Why are you worried about something small? It's like you've got the greatest power and you're worried about a little mouse running around. It doesn't make sense. So that's a basic trick of counseling that is used. ذَلِكَ سَرِيُّ الْإِيمَانِ. This is exactly what the Prophet does. Focus on that which shows your faith instead of letting shaitan play with your mind. The next hadith, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يأتي الشيطان أحدكم فيقول من خلق كذا ومن خلق كذا حتى يقول من خلق ربك فإذا بلغه فليستعذ بالله ولينتح. Okay, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions shaitan will come to one of you and say that who created this and who created that, i.e., slowly he'll go from rank to rank, stage to stage, until hatta yaqul, until he says man khalaqa rabbuk, who created your Lord then? So when one of you reaches that stage, when the shaitan reaches that stage with you, when shaitan reaches that stage with you, or when a person finds himself in that stage, فَلْيَسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ, then seek refuge with Allah, وَلْيَنْتَهِ, and stop, refrain from doing that, refrain from pondering over this thought. I.e., seek your refuge with the heart and the tongue. As Imam Ghazali and others have pointed out, there's no point saying A'udhu Billah without you believing that in your mind that Allah will provide protection with you. You've got to say on the tongue and firmly believe Allah will protect you, and be conscious and know what you're saying. Don't say A'udhu Billah and constantly indulge the thought. Rather, focus on the A'udhu Billah and seek refuge from Allah and be focused with your heart and your tongue, and then you will be protected. And you should refrain from giving indulgence to this thought. Okay, now Imam al-Munawi mentions the reason being is because when you do ta'awudh billah, you can actually get rid of the thought. The thought disappears. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't evidence. There's clear evidence by which you can reply to this. We'll mention some of them. But Allama al-Minawi mentions the reality is if you are doing this with a human being, you can respond. And I'll give you some of the responses you can give to a human being. But you're dealing with shaitan. Shaitan ain't going to care what evidence you present. His job is to make you slip. As soon as you reply to that, he'll just move on to the next point. He'll keep moving on and on. He's got all the time in the world. Even if he doesn't believe in the arguments he's saying and putting in your head, sooner or later one will work. So the best thing you could do is cut it off from the root and seek refuge in Allah, because you don't have the time or the experience to constantly argue with every point shaitan is going to put in front of you. But if it's another human, you can, but not with the shaitan. Okay? Now, the next thing to keep in mind is this, the scholars of hadith mentioned the reason being is because what is it that requires an answer from you? It is matters that have an asal, something established about them. They have proof. They are either truth or they've been established through evidence. But whatever shaitan's putting in front of you is just batil, falsehood. It has no basis. So when something has no basis, it's hard. There's no need to argue with it. The way you deal with it is just to reject it and move on. Something has a basis, you put on the table, you put something back. But if something has absolutely no asal or basis to it, then there's no point looking at evidence and dalil. That's not the way to go about it. Rather, you just dismiss it. Because just like 2 + 2 = 4. Well, if you try to establish 2 + 2 = 4 from a purely mathematical point of view, where you have to prove everything in maths, it becomes very hard. But the bottom line is, we know 2 + 2 = 4. You just dismiss the argument and move on. It's irrelevant. Imam al-Khattabi mentions, had the Prophet ﷺ given us the permission to answer this, it would be very easy for any person to answer. Because look at the sentence itself. The very last part of the sentence where Shaitan says, "Who created Allah?" is rejected by the very first part of the sentence, i.e., that everything is a creation. So, hence the question is about creation. As soon as you ask who created the creator, that becomes irrelevant because he is the creator. He is the asal, everything else is the fara, and hence to ask that question itself is wrong. Who created? Well, if he is not a creation, the question itself is just wrong. Simple as that. And to accept anything else would lead to what's known as ma la yatanahi. And we'll speak about what ma la yatanahi means. In technical terms, it's called infinite regression. Some of the scholars say, look, there are simple answers we can give to help us understand, but these are the answers you need to give to the shaitan, because shaitan will come up with some crazy theory and try to make you doubt. You seek refuge in Allah. But if you're dealing with a human, then you can say, number one, this question of who created Allah itself is flawed, because the idea of creation can only be to everything that is other than Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a creation, so the question can never apply to him. He is azali, has been, he has not come into existence. Only things that come into existence, you can ask, well, who made them? Who created them? So that question itself is wrong. Point number 2, we use the law of causality, which means that everything that comes to existence must have a cause. So the reality is Allah never came into existence, he's always been, so hence he doesn't need a cause. The third one is the infinite regression argument or point, which is the reality is, if you were to somehow assume Allah is part of the creation, na'udhu billah, which we don't, but if you were to assume that, then he would need a creator and something else would need a creator, that would lead to infinite regression, and that would mean that the world can never exist. And the fact it exists shows that this point is wrong. For example, I, as a shooter, as a spy, I am shooting someone, but for me to shoot, I need my superior's permission. Who needs his superior's permission? Who needs his superior permission? If that goes on backwards for infinity, then it's impossible for me to ever get permission to shoot, so the shot can never take place. Same in the world. The world can never come into existence if it goes backwards infinitely. So the fact is, there has to be one at the beginning who is the creator of it all. And the final thing is, if the human is even accepting, just do as the Prophet says with the shaitan, because the human's being like a shaitan, which is a'udhu billah, that's it, and I move on. Okay. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يزال الناس يتساءلون حتى يقال هذا خلق الله الخلق فمن خلق الله ومن وجد من ذلك شيئا فليقل آمنت بالله ورسوله. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that people will continue questioning each other until they say, this is what Allah has created, then who created Allah? And if any of you ever finds yourself in that situation, then say, Amantu billahi wa rasuli. I believe in Allah and His messengers. Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Ibn Hajar Asqalani mentions that even the intellect teaches us anything that has come into being, the muhdathat, needs someone who brings into being. However, for this, they need to be a muhdath, they need to be brought into being. That can never apply to Allah, because Allah is not hadith, hence can never be asked to Allah. Similar to what we said before. Okay, any questions before we move on? 1, 2 more hadiths, then we'll stop. Okay. وعن ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما منكم من أحد إلا وقد وكل به قرينه من الجن وقرينهم من الملائكة. There's not one amongst you except that for him there has been appointed his companion from the jinn and his companion from the angel. Meaning each and every one of us have a companion, one amongst the jinn who plans to destroy us and to lead us to sins and temptations, and who is actively trying to put us into doubts and lead us to sins. And we have an angel that whispers good to us, that tells us to focus on, for example, positive things in life, that puts good ideas sometimes in our mind. قالوا وإياك يا رسول الله. The Sahaba said, and even you, O Messenger of Allah. قال وإياي, yes, and me also. ولكن الله عانني عليه فأسلم. However, even me also, however, Allah has aided me against him, فأسلم. Now, what does فأسلم mean? Allah has aided me against him, فأسلم. This word is read in two ways. Number one, فأسلم. Allah has aided me, so he has accepted Islam. He's become a Muslim. My jinn has become a Muslim. فَلَا يَأْمُرُنِي إِلَّا بِخَيْرٍ. So he does not command me except that which is good. Okay? This is the first explanation. And this is what Qadi Iyad mentioned is the most strongest opinion. Imam Nawawi says that's the most strongest opinion, because the hadith says he only commands me to be good, then that means he must have accepted Islam. Otherwise, he won't command good. The second opinion is فَأَسْلَمُوا. However, Allah has aided me against him, so I'm safe from him. Second explanation is I'm safe from him. فَأَسْلَمُوا means I'm safe from him. فَأَسْلَمَ, he's accepted Islam. So two explanations of the hadith that the scholars give. And each scholar looks at it from different points of view. Some look at it from the point of view of here the words, then the end part of the hadith indicates that the stronger is that I'm safe, that he's accepted Islam. Others will point at it from the literally chain point of views and may argue the chain might be slightly stronger here. But the bottom line is this: both of these explanations are there. Allah knows best which is the stronger one. However, the meaning itself is clear, that the Prophet ﷺ was protected one way or another from the shayateen. And that's why Qadi Iyad mentions that the Ummah agreed, the Ummah has a consensus, the Prophet was protected from the shaitan entering his body or his mind or his tongue. Okay. Next hadith. عن أنس قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الشيطان يجري من الإنسان مجرى الدم. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم says that indeed shaitan flows through Adam like the flowing of blood. Okay? Now, this hadith has been understood two simple ways. Number one, it's literally shaitan flows through humans like blood flows. He enters inside us, and this is because, number one, shaitan is a fluid, and what's the word? How would I pronounce this word? I've written it myself, but I was unsure of its pronunciation. Eter. Can anyone read this out? Because I'm stuck here. Can you see the screen? Ethereal, I believe. Is that correct? I can't hear you.
Yes.
That's fine. When I'm unsure of the words in English for some Arabic text, because my English isn't that fluent, I just write it down. But fluid and ethereal beings, meaning that these are beings that can change form and they can enter into other forms and their molecules change. That's a shaitan, and hence he can flow through us like blood flows. And because we were created from, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, from hama'im masnoon, we were created from clay molded from either decayed mud or black mud. And we were created from, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, clay like pottery, and obviously that requires fire, and hence there's a slight fire within us, metaphorically speaking, and hence shaitan, that allows shaitan to flow within us. That's some of the explanation the scholars give. But shaitan enters with us and he flows through us like blood, one explanation. The second one is a metaphor. It's not literal that shaitan flows within us. Rather, he can can get influence over us like blood. Like blood flows through all parts of our body. Likewise, shaitan will come at you from every angle. From your head to toe, he'll use every trick under the foot, and he will influence and become a crucial part of your life if you become bad, just like blood does. And he, at every time of your life, he's there just like blood is. That's the second explanation. And the second doesn't necessarily negate the first one. If the first one is true, the second one is definitely true. So the first one doesn't negate the second one, sorry. Allah knows best, but the meaning of the hadith is clear either way. Shaitan can influence us and will influence us and stayed with us, actually trying to influence us just like blood does. Okay. We'll stop here because we want to do tafsir as well. Any questions? We'll give you a few minutes break. Any questions? Are humans made out of 4 elements? I mean, it depends who you ask. Traditionally speaking, philosophers, yes, would say that the fire, air, water, which one am I missing? Earth are the 4 elements make up humans, and that was traditionally accepted. Many scientists today would question if there's a fiery elements in us, but you can say metaphorically there certainly is. Fire causes combustion and releases energy, and we digest food and we turn it into energy. We in our bodies actually do what fire does, and from that angle, yes, you can say the 4 elements are found in us. From a purely biological point of view, I feel scientists may disagree, but Allah knows best. Is it a good way of determining what Allah is by stating what He is not? Interesting question. Personally, I say no. The reason being is because if you read some of the traditional books written in Islamic creed, but from a philosophical point of view, such as al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya, these are books that contain a lot of good. But when I was studying them as a student, I personally disliked that when the qualities of Allah were described, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was always Allah's not this and Allah's not this, Allah's not this, Allah's not this, Allah's not this. And I don't feel that's the right way of going about it. And the best way of going about it is what Allah is and as He describes Himself. Normally, what Allah does in the Quran, He tells us what He is. Negation is only needed when there's a doubt, and Allah negates certain, like وَمَا مَسَّنَا مِن لُغُوبٍ, tiredness never touched us. For example, on the seventh day, Allah negated that because there was a doubt. But if there's no doubt, there's no point, because if you do general negation of everything, then you will trap yourself, and then you get into philosophical arguments about, okay, can Allah do this? Can Allah not do this? And you go beyond your ability to understand a creator that is far beyond your comprehension.